Welcome back everyone to another Mythfall devlog. It's been some time since the last devlog video, so there's quite a lot of new features that got added. So today we're just going to go through those and talk about what is new. For example, we redid the tutorial, we added a questing system, like a proper questing system where you talk to people and accomplish things. We also added dungeon ascensions, which are kind of like these infix modifiers that get added to dungeons to make them a little bit more replayable. And then we also reworked how the backpack works to make it a little bit more user-friendly and easier to work with, especially with the new crafting stuff that we're kind of leaning into more. So yeah, let's hop right into it and I will walk through how it all works. So for the tutorial, we basically made this whole new dungeon that you spawn in if you're a brand new player. It has these little pop-up things at the top that kind of walk you through what you need to be doing. So dashing to the other side. Then there's a little bit of lore that gets like interstitialed in between the to-dos, dashing through projectiles. We have that. And it teaches all the basic stuff like dashing, fighting. There's further sections that do healing, and then there's a boss fight at the very end. I won't walk through all of it, but you kind of get the gist of it. So it's kind of like just a basic early on tutorial to teach people how to move around and do the basics. So yeah, then eventually at the end of the tutorial, you'll recall and you'll be pulled into the town area, which is typically where people like craft their house and stuff like that. And you get this little quest pop up. This is mostly for older players who logged in for the first time with the new quest existing and they didn't know like where it is. So it just kind of tells you where the quest start is at. But basically you can talk to the NPCs. They'll like give you tasks to do, and we have little text effects that we added as well, which is kind of cool. I'll talk about how we implemented all of this stuff after I give a little demo. But yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. It'll pop up like little things you need to click, and that progresses the quest to the next level. But yeah, after you talk to him, he tells you to talk to the king, which kind of progresses the story a little bit. It also makes you walk over to your house, and that teaches you how to like place housing blocks and craft items. You get like one of the NPCs will give you wood that you can use to craft like a better sword, just to like get you started into the game. So the goal of the first quest is just to teach those like really basic mechanics for brand new players, so they kind of understand like what the game loop is going to be like. That's the objective, and I think it turned out pretty well. There's also a little cutscene at the end of it, or I'll show it here, and it looks kind of like this, and I'll talk about how this is all implemented. So yeah, let's hop into explaining quest structure. So I think the easiest way to think about quests, and there's a little bit more data that gets associated with them, but the easiest way to think about a quest, at least a simple quest, is just a list of tasks that need to be completed. So for example, in this set of data, these ones might have already been completed, and this is the one that the player is working on. And these are the future tasks. So after you complete this task, you get pushed into this new task. And yeah, so this is like the basic quest structure. This doesn't support branching, but if you wanted to support branching, you could do something like this, except for having branching sections to other lists, or you could make it more like a directed acyclical graph and then just walk through that. But a list is simple, and I don't expect to have branching, at least for the near term. So yeah, quests will just be linear for now. But anyway, this is just the questing structure. How the quests tasks get progressed, so how you progress from here to here, is the client does something, and the client thinks that, or the client wants to ask the server, like, can I complete this next task? So I'm allowed to complete this orange task here. So we ask the server that. The server might need to do some internal checking to see if, for example, if the task is to like turn in to like iron ore or something to some NPC. You might be inside of some dialogue. You might say like, okay, like take my iron ore, and you click that button. And then the server says, okay, does the player have iron ore to take? And if it does, then it'll take that iron ore and it'll go back and it'll say like, yes, you did have the iron ore, so you can go to the next task. That's kind of the general structure. Some tasks are really simple though, where it's just like talk to this NPC. So the client can just say like, hey, I've done this one, and there's nothing really to check. So it just kind of return true and push you to the next task. So yeah, that's the general questing structure. It's pretty simple. It's just complicated in terms of how many different things need to be checked. Like for example, there's a check in the tutorial quest, which is to make sure the player has placed a certain item down in their house, which is the crafting workbench. So we have to check stuff like that. There's just a lot of different arbitrary things you need to check. Other than that, once you have that structure in place, the task list is pretty easy to build. And I can just kind of crank out quests with different tasks and stuff. But yeah, let's talk about how the dialogue effects work as well, which is here. Originally, when I did text rendering, I thought of text as just a string, which is kind of one large object of a bunch of text. So for example, it says hello world here. So if you think of that as one string, it's kind of hard to break that apart into different styling. So for example, if I wanted the world portion to be blue, I would have to I'd have to render like two things, which is one would be the first string, and then the second one would be the world string, and we have to render those separately as two separate strings. This isn't as general at purpose as I wanted, so I ended up breaking all of my strings down into individual characters. So I have a list of characters, which in Go is called runes. So I have a list of runes, and each of these gets rendered independently, which is pretty much the same thing as you do in a string. It's just pushed outward to the user rather than to the like rendering library. And then this is pretty powerful. This is a pretty powerful construct because now you can set styles along the way. So for example, you have the default style, which is maybe like render white and just straight across. And you can set the default style, render each character, and each character will use this style. But then you can do advanced stuff where you change, we have a default style, you render hello in the default style, and then you render world, you change to the blue text style, and then you render world, and this will be colored blue. And you can do this on an individual basis. So I could do blue text style for just the W character, and then I could switch back to the default, or I could like do a rainbow color pattern where I switch the style between every single character. And this also lets you do things like this, where like for example, I have a default style and I want to do a wave style across the rest of them. So now I can render this text kind of linearly going to the right. And then once I get to the wave style, I know that I want to like sinusoidally orient these. So I basically offset the Y position of each of these characters based off of some like global timer, some global animation timer. And I pass it into a sine function. I decide how far up and down each character needs to be rendered to give it a little wave effect. And then in terms of encoding, I can encode stuff just like this, where I say like, this is the string that I want to render with the default style, because messages start by default with the default style. And then I want to change to the style wave orange, which will change the color of this to orange and then also give it the wave effect. But yeah, let's talk about the cutscene next. So how the cutscene triggers is basically there's a little collider box on the on like the walking path that the player is directed to walk to, and they walk into this area. There's a trigger collider there basically that spawns this cutscene entity. The cutscene entity has this cutscene component added to it, and I kind of modeled this a little bit after that 3 blue 1 brown rendering library called Manim, which is kind of for it's for like generating math diagrams, but I like the concept, which is basically to generate a list of operations that need to be executed and then have a rendering system like walk through these and execute them one by one. For example, this cutscene has a list of things that needs to happen. So this first one sets the ambient lighting. So that generates a set ambient lighting node. And then there's a set music node, which translates to this one. Then there's a spawn entity node, which is like one of these down here. There's 3 of them, but I wanted to simplify it. And there's a wait node, which is kind of like a sleep. And then there's just like more stuff. And then how the operation works for processing these is there's just a very, very simple for loop, or there's a very simple loop that is just kind of executing this. And then when this one's finished, it goes to the next one. And then when this one finishes, it goes to the next one. And then when this one finishes, it goes to the next one. That's kind of how it works. And most of these have a 0 sleep time associated to them. So they just execute one after another. But then when you get to this one has like a 2-second wait, like a 2-second wait, let's say, gets associated to this wait. So it needs to sleep for 2 seconds. So then the system will just like subtract however long that frame time was from this wait node, and it'll eventually count down to 0. And then once it gets to 0, it'll move on to the next one. So that kind of simulates the like sleeping in the cutscene for 2 seconds. And that's kind of how that works. That's how I coded cutscenes, and I'm pretty happy with them. All right, let's talk about dungeon modifiers. One of the problems I had with game progression speed, or like game pacing, I guess you might call it, is that there's kind of a lot of different loot that drops from each of these dungeons. So for example, Pirate Cove drops like 8 different unique items. So I wanted to add this dungeon modifier system to increase the amount of replayability, so that once you complete it once, you unlock the next level, and that lets you like do a harder version. And then the reward for doing the harder version is you get this increased luck stat, which gives you a chance to get an additional loot roll. So if you have a 50% luck, then you get 50% chance for an additional loot roll when you defeat the boss. That's kind of like the high level purpose of this. And then how it's implemented essentially is you get this little menu item here. So when you defeat it for the first time, like this is one that I've never done. So I can't, I've unlocked 0 ascensions. But then here I just have this little menu, these little buttons pop up, and I can essentially just click like, oh, I want to do Ascension 1, I want to do Ascension 2, and it'll give you different modifiers. And then the Ascension 5 is the hardest. It adds this boss boss orbiter that kind of just spirals around the boss and attacks you as well as the boss, which can make the boss fights a lot harder. But it's kind of it's the highest one, so it's got to be the most challenging. And the different modifiers can do different things. So we can walk in this one, and then you'll get this little icon here that pops up, which is the dungeon modifiers. So as you can see, I'm getting a 20% luck bonus for 2 modifiers. Each one gave me 10%. And the 2 modifiers that we got were hobbled, where players have -8 dexterity, which will nerf kind of bow builds. And then we have hesitating, where players have a -5 attack speed. So they'll just attack a lot slower. So that makes them this will make it a little bit harder. These ones are actually not that hard to work through, but yeah, and this is such an easy dungeon that like any modifier wouldn't really matter. But there's other ones, like for example, mobs will have more health, or mobs will have will shoot more bullets, or they'll have defense, or they'll do more damage. Stuff like that is all possible. So at least it gives a little bit different feel every single time you run into the dungeon, and hopefully makes it a little bit more fun. All right, and the last thing I wanted to talk about was the new backpack system. How the old system worked is whenever you were not in town, you couldn't access your backpack, and it was this little like drop box, and you could only pull stuff out of it when you went to the bank. So you go to the bank and you could deposit your stuff from your backpack to the bank, and then you could use it. What I decided to change it to was I decided to just make a like backpack pop-up thing here. So you can click this check mark and X to like show and hide it. But when it's shown, you can basically just drop items in here, and you can do stackable items as well. So even when you're inside of a dungeon, or you're inside of like the sphere or something like that, even when you're in here, you can still move items in and out of your backpack to your inventory and equip them and stuff like that. So that makes it a little bit easier because you can just stack tons and tons of potions and bring them with you. But I think it's an okay trade-off, just because what I'm going for is more of a crafting game anyways. So I think adding the ability to stack items, which we added a few patches ago, and also adding the backpack, which supports stacked items as well, will make it so that's easier for players to like kind of go out and get a bunch of resources and bring them all back at once. So I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. I think I'll leave it like this, and if there's any feedback, I'll obviously address it, but I think I'm leaning more towards something like this instead of limiting the backpack usage. Anyways, that's all I have for this week. As always, an absolutely massive thank you to all the supporters on YouTube, Twitch, GitHub, and Patreon. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.